Leonard, if you could start off with
Google.
Okay, yeah, sure. So let's talk about Google. It's easy. We're about, I think, 140,000 people. I don't know actually how many we are, but there's hundreds and thousands of us. And within our product org, we're organized like a traditional tech company, as in you have product being separate from engineering and UX. It's a separate function with separate management chains that you operate in. And the product manager is very clearly the person responsible to identifying what are we building and have a good rationale for why we're building that thing and not any of the other alternatives that you have. There will always be a lot of alternatives. The product manager is not responsible for telling, which technologies he would use or how do we solve this specific technical challenge. What's the UI going to look like? There's a lot of things which are handled by specialists very, very, very distinctly. And the product manager role is aligning all of those activities around the vision you set. So you're responsible for the vision. So if people don't understand what they're building or have any sort of misconceptions around what are we building towards, then that's on the product manager. So traditional product management, I would say, if you look at kind of from a textbook perspective. Now, to be fair, I only see it from my perspective. Google is a large company. I can only talk about what I see. And obviously, I have my own opinions on what would be the ideal structure. And I think, we're doing what we can with the scale we have. I think smaller companies will have a very different thing. So I don't know who's going to take it on. Fanny, Jason?
Come on, Fanny.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I think, in my company, Doctolib, I think between 2,500 and 3,000 people, depending on the month. We grow quite fast at the moment. We do also have a split between product and tech, similar to what you described, also in terms of the role of the PM. But that's also what we're striving for. I think that's the definition of the split and the role of the PM we have. Doesn't necessarily apply to all the teams. There's some specificities, I think. But I think that's the idea we have. We also done the product. We have designers as part of the product team. Data is also part of the product team, so that's one big unit. And then we have the tech side on the other side. This being said, tech and product always work in pairs. So we do have two different departments, but they always work. We always have a pair of an engineering director, a product director, EM, PM each time.
Yeah, and from the Judo perspective, it's actually been an interesting year because we actually merged with another company towards the middle to second, third of last year. So there's been a lot of reimagining how we work together and trying to bring two different product cultures together. I'll say completely openly that the product team is still very much in development at the moment. We brought together two small teams. We've got like 3 people, myself, and then 2 other people in the team at the moment. We're actually looking to hire another couple of people at the moment and start to scale out properly. And I guess the way that I'd say it at the moment is it's kind of a bit all hands to the pump at the moment. Very small company. I think that's 60 people total. Obviously going through this journey together to try and work out who we are. We've got an exciting new name reveal and rebrand coming out next week, which should be pretty cool as well. And yeah, just trying to work out like what the best types of people to bring in and how to organize. So we're very much looking to organize around problems to solve versus like just being a bunch of people working very specifically on like certain bits of platform. We want to focus this on the user. I think another thing just to call out from our side is that a lot of our clients are very big businesses. We're a B2B company. We're very sales led in our approach to the market. There's no real there's no B2C element to it at all. There are some smaller companies, but the vast majority of our kind of strategic efforts go to that bigger side, which is obviously something then that has its own impact on how product teams get to execute on the plan and how they even get to make the plan in the first place.
Really great. And Hannah has been replaced with me. We're having a great night, but this is a great so far. So thank you all. I wanted to ask, maybe Fanny, you could talk through where in your opinion do PMs sit? Example, is it 1 project manager per team, or is it 5 teams per project manager? Is it group project managers? What's your opinion there?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on what is expected from the team, and I would explain a bit what I mean. So my ideal is always to have the PM sit in the team with the people making solutions, coming up with solutions, but because the closest you are from team members, the better you can engage them towards your vision, and it's much easier to get things done, I felt. This being said, I also see now in my current role, because we work in such a specific industry, we're in healthcare, there's so much stuff you need to know, so that sometimes the role is slightly split, so that you have other people. We work a lot with product strategists, for example, and they take care of checking all the things that as a PM alone you wouldn't have time to do. And they sit outside of the team, so this comes with good things because they can do part of the job that we would not be able to do. But it also has the drawback that there's always a knowledge gap that you have that you're not able to build on, or that you miss some opportunities because this knowledge is not directly in the team. So I think, if possible, the knowledge and the PM, the strategy, should always be part of the team. But it doesn't always work because sometimes you have different needs, right? And then you need to slightly adapt. But the closest from the team, I believe, should you get the best results.
Yeah, if I can just add on, I think it's very, I would 100% agree that it's very important to be very close to the team. I think that the discussion is, should you be in the team or outside the team? It's more of it depends on the size of the company and the domain and knowledge you needed, how close are you to the users, and so forth. I would think you regardless of how you are, you have to be close to the team, right? You have to be a trusted stakeholder as the product manager. So I think the discussion is, it's almost like you can kind of tilt the discussion a bit and saying, you need to have the trust of the engineers. Do you need to have trust of the UX team? Do you need to have trust of the UXRP teams? Of course you need to do. Of course. But do you have to lead them as a leader, people manager? Probably not. I think that's my personal opinion. I think, and this is where I think the size and company and the way things is different. So I think it's a really interesting discussion and an interesting problem to think about. But I think as long as we agree, you can't go wrong as long as you agree that you need to be able to influence them and have them trust your instincts and your opinions and your direction.
I think the key thing is for me, and I think you touched on it with some of the other comments, is this is a partnership, right? Like, if we're going to say that product teams need to, product managers need to be close to or in a team. Like, again, I don't necessarily think that specifically matters, as long as it's a partnership of equals where you've got product, design, and engineering all working together, hand in hand, skipping down the road. Like, this is what we need, and that can be achieved in a number of ways. And you've also got to call out that, of course, in a company like Google, with all its massive scale and all of its money, like, there's plenty of ways that you can experiment with team structures, and you can hire and not hire people. If you're in a fairly small startup and you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a lot of ability to hire all those people, then necessarily this might get a bit messier as you start to build out and scale. But I think that ultimately I would always want to optimize the team for that partnership and making sure that the people that are building this product together are building it together, and not like, you don't just have someone swooping in every now and then and just like leaving a present on the desk and then leaving again. This should be a collaboration, and whatever we can do to optimize for that collaboration, I think, is the most important thing from my perspective. I do agree that getting people close to the team is a given. In the team, it kind of depends on what you mean by in, and to some extent what you mean by team. It's like there are different ways to lay out a company. I'm generally very much in favor of having like an area or a problem that a team is supposed to solve, and that you would have a product manager in the team. But we probably come back to it, but I still think that should be a product manager that reports to a product function, not just like almost like a failed engineer that just kind of didn't make it as an engineer and got put into the product role. Like, that's, product management is a skilled job, right? It's got, there are things you need to be good at to be a good product manager, and there are practices that should be at least promoted, if not fully lived, through a product management function. And I just think it's important to make sure that is driven through a strong product organization rather than just being a kind of a hanger-on.
Interesting. And so if there's one product manager per team, do they have that vision and strategy at that level, or are they focused? You're saying they're focused more on the delivery. Is that what you're saying, Jason?
I wouldn't. No, I don't think that product managers should be focused on delivery. I mean, obviously they need to deliver stuff as part of the team. Like, the team's general responsibility, if we live up to all the agile and scrum cliches, like, we're all in it together, right? But that's actually the best way to do it. We're all in it together. But I don't think that the product manager is just there to crack the whip and sort of tell people to build stuff. I mean, They're there to set the context and give the feedback and stand up for the team and protect the team and find the scope and protect the scope and all of that good stuff. I think when it comes to an individual team, like you're sitting there with, say, let's say 3 teams or 3 PMs, those PMs are necessarily going to have to be aligned with the overall vision of the company, the overall vision of the product, because otherwise they're going to be building stuff all over the place that doesn't support that vision. But that vision for the product as a whole, or like what I kind of refer to as the portfolio, would presumably be set by some kind of head of product, group product manager, some other person that's maybe operating at a different abstraction level. But those people within their teams that are given those problems to solve should be given more or less the autonomy to solve those problems the best way they see fit with their team. So they still have a strategic role. It's just the strategy is part of a bigger strategy, which ladders up to support the business. That'd be the way I see it.
Yeah, well, I want to add in. I think I 100% agree. You need to have that sort of hierarchy of a PM is responsible for, in our case, it's features. It's a separate part of the feature because it's a large product. But so you would then be responsible for a feature, and a group product manager would be, overall in charge of that feature. As in, if it fails, that's on the GPM. But the responsibility is pushed down to the PM on the individual level, who are able then to have that. They're empowered, to use a very famous quote from Marty Kagan, in terms of just saying they're empowered to make the right calls, make the right decisions. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of reviews in a large company like Google. We do a lot of reviews to kind of check and make sure everyone's aligned. And of course, the GPM is the first one who'll be kind of at fault if that hasn't been truly vetted, right? Because as a people manager, your role is to make sure that the team under you are performing at a level where, to deliver the right product that you want. So it can ultimately kind of balance that way. And I think it's almost like looking at a sort of checks and balances of, are we driving, the right velocity to the right direction where we want to go? And, as more senior you get in a company like Google, you get more scope. That's how we kind of define it. Your scope will be, you used to have one product as a GPM. Now you're a director. Now you have, 4 products. And now you're a VP. And now you have, a whole area. So it's very typical how that kind of scales. But of course, you get also the team, not beneath you, but to work with you. I think that's the right way to put it, who are able to execute on different functions.
Yeah, Leonard, and I'll stick with you for a moment on that. With a large number of teams like Google, how do you coordinate? Are teams independent, or how do they overlap, or do they overlap in any way?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of overlap, and you do stuff that kind of affects other teams, and you have to have a healthy culture of respect, and we have a really good culture of respect. I think that's one of the things I really love about the company. From my personal opinion, is that the way people kind of tend to, you don't break others people's code. For instance, you can break your own code, but you don't break other people's code. That's like an engineering creed, but of course it's up to the PM to fix that if that happens. And I've been part of that. It's a really fun journey. But we have a culture of respect and respect each other, and how are you impacting other teams? And of course, that's typically what's being, not that escalator is the wrong word, but that's what's being considered by the executives. They will look at things like, okay, wait, are we aligned and going in the right direction? Are we driving? Is this fulfilling the mission? Are laddering up to the larger strategic initiatives we have? But there is I think the coordination there is, I think, what slows down, I would say, larger companies. I think we find a way to still make it move faster, but obviously a tiny 60-person company will be able to move a lot faster than a large 140,000 people company. So that's fairly obvious.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Fanny, what's your thoughts there on how your teams coordinate? Are they self-sufficient? Are they independent?
Not as independent as they could be. So I can give you an example. So we're split in different domains. Each domain is more or less one mission, mostly based on the type of users we work on. So we have a domain focused on patients, and then the domain focused on pro users for doctors and hospitals, for example. So obviously those two are not so connected. But when a team works on a project, they don't work only on their part, right? So you also have to work on this. So we work on the end-to-end experience. So that means if I build something for hospitals, I also have to take care of the patient side for hospitals. It means it needs to be super aligned with these teams who have much more experience and knowledge working on that part of the product. And we were not super good at this, let's be honest. We made some changes. Now we have we identify each quarter which project would be touching different parts of the product, and then those people form their own meetings, and they have their own alignment to make sure that nothing breaks. So it could still be optimized, I think, but I think, as Leonard mention, I think the size of the company, the more you grow, the more alignment you get, and the less agile you become in a way. So it's always about finding this balance of how much autonomy you can still have and how much alignment you need to have with the other teams. And it's not only about alignment. I think it's also about the experience from other teams and the skills that you can get from others, so that you don't have to repeat the same things over and over. So if you think about user research, for example, a team that is specific on that area, you also want to reuse what they learn, right? And this also requires this, you always have this overlap about sharing knowledge also, that I think should still be improved, but so we also started to have PMOs to lead this kind of project. Sometimes that helps, but I think there's always things to improve on alignment.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a few questions in here. One for you, Fanny, which I like, is with nearly 3,000 people in Doctolib, how many product managers are there in the company if there's one per team?
That's a math question. So we have around 60 teams, and we have a bit more PMs than we have teams, because some teams have APMs and then they have a senior PM. So then they are two, so they can learn. But we have one PM one product person per team, let's say, for 60 teams. We also have a whole domain on developers experience, and we have more technical teams in a way. They also have PMs because they just have different types of users, let's say, but they also have their own missions.
Great. And Jason, how about you? What's the team like for product managers?
Well, again, so we're very nascent in the new product organization and still pretty small. So we've very much got 3 people looking after basically 3 bits of the stack at the moment. One of the things actually that's interesting, kind of talking about this alignment thing, and something that we have as well, is almost the concept of, well, it's not almost, it is the concept of a platform product manager. So much of our offering is based on data. Like we're a company that's powered by data, and we do a lot of stuff on top of that data, but at the same time the data is there and it kind of permeates our system. So like we have a platform that then a data platform that then powers a lot of the user value that we can give, and that obviously could be sliced and diced a number of ways. I mean, the concept of a platform product manager is it's not that crazy. There are plenty of places have them. And I think that the alignment overhead is still there, though. I mean, even as a small company, because we've got customer-facing APIs, we've got internal-facing APIs, we've got the platform APIs, we've got data ingestion, and all of the stuff that goes on, and trying to make sure that changes that are required kind of permeate through the system. And in some cases, they're worked on by data engineers in one team, or they're worked on by front-end developers in another team. Like there is actually still a need, even in a relatively small company, to maintain alignment between teams. Now, one way to slice and dice that could be to go mega cross-functional and have data engineers in every team. We've not done that so far, and there's arguments for and against, obviously, depending on how fundamentalist you are about cross-functional teams and that's a debate that could last forever. But the simple fact is that with regards to that alignment, I think there's an interesting kind of dichotomy in a way, because obviously ultimately the product managers, or the product manager for an initiative, for example, they are responsible for that initiative being successful. Ultimately it's their not everyone likes the word, but it's their responsibility or their accountability to make sure, and they're the ones that have to stand in front of that initiative. But there's obviously a bunch of engineers across different teams that are working on things that support that initiative. I actually am massively in favor, and I believe the engineers are in favor too, of kind of managing a lot of that coordination on a technical level between themselves. Like, it's not my job to go and tell a bunch of engineers how to engineer. Like, they should be able to do that for me. And I think there's an interesting question in the chat, which maybe touches on that as well, around project versus product management, which starts to get my hives rising up a little bit. But it's just like the engineers in a good, well-functioning engineering organization, I believe, should be able to do a lot of that project management and the kind of getting the engineering work done without being, again, kind of stood over with an overbearing PM or PO telling them what to do. Like, that's not our job, to tell engineers what to do and tell them how to do it. And that's where I think the project management thing is interesting. I mean, ultimately, Fanny's talking about PMOs, for example, and I'm sure that there's program managers and project managers and PMOs in all these different types of companies, and I'm sure that there's a lot of use for them in certain cases. But I'd like to think that that's something that only comes with massive scale and not something that you just bring in too early, because ultimately, if you need to have so much oversight so soon, it does point to a certain amount of dysfunction within the organization, because you need kind of adults to come and make you do stuff in order. It's like, we're all grown-ups. If this is a partnership, if we're working together, communicating and aligned, a lot of that project management should go away, because of course project and product management are so entirely different that it's almost offensive to to kind of bucket. I know it's a common thing. Everyone thinks I'm a project manager, and of course there is always some element of project management in any job. You've got to get stuff done in an order. But I think that having like a project management or an oversight layer, certainly too soon, but to some extent, even at larger scale, starts to feel like there are probably other ways to solve that.
Yeah, and Leonard, I'm not going to ask you about Google complexity of their product managers, but I will touch on what Jason is talking about, which is Lucas asked the question. A common misconception they feel is when they run into product versus project management. So how do your companies balance those responsibilities, and how do they balance separate roles?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the last part of that, separate roles, absolutely separate roles. It's 100%. It's a very different role to have a project manager role and a product manager role. I do say that a lot of people coming from project management into product management, but that's very different, because they're very close to, especially if you're a technical project manager, you're working very closely with engineering, and you understand how that world works, and you're able then to translate that into how the technical aspects you need from a product related role. So 100% very different roles. I would say the responsibilities are, I think, Jason, you really hit it on the head there. It's very much, if you have to tell the engineers what exactly needs to be done and in what order, there's some real other dysfunctional parts of the team. Now, there might be some use cases which I'm not aware of, but what I've seen, at least, I would 100%, and I've never seen that. And to be fair, if you think of, I interact with product managers all the time, my own team, but people on the other parts of the business as well. I rarely interact with project managers. And the reason why is because we rarely need them for what they do. But sometimes you need them if there's a big initiative, there's a lot of coordination, and you need someone to not be the adult room, but to keep everyone on track. If there's like 15 moving pieces, and it's not within one team, but it's spread across 15 teams, then you need to have someone who can kind of really guide this. So the project management is a really interesting one. And I think we don't operate with product owners either, even though you could argue in some product manager becomes product owners due to the nature of the product. So it's it's not a crystal clear answer, but I would from how you balance those responsibilities. But I think it's very clear when it's separate roles, and it should be very defined in the title. So we call it PGMs, as Jason was alluding to, for program managers, who are very different project managers, or program managers we call them typically, and they can also be handling just like you say, there's some initiative you're writing, doesn't have to be technical even, it could be something different. So it's a little bit how we operate.
I love it. Fanny, do you have anything to add there?
I think most of the things were said. What I could just add is that it doesn't always have to be a completely separate role, but it's important that a person in the team is in charge of doing this, and it doesn't have to be the product manager. I think, or maybe not even in the team, but someone has to do this role of leading the delivery. It doesn't have to be the PM, because the PM should lead the discovery, right? So this split should happen, and then who does it? If it's a project manager, PMO, a program manager, or a developer, or a tech lead, makes no difference for me. I think the role can be split and could even rotate, but I think the split between the discovery phase and the delivery phase really needs to be clear.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Leonard, I'm just going to touch back on you. Does the product manager look after delivery management, or is there a separate delivery management in your teams?
No. So that's typically up to engineering. As I mentioned, it's up to engineering how to deliver and deliver at what. I mean, the typical product manager will come in and say, well, so okay, we have this vision, this is what we're building towards, and this is the requirement doc we have for whatever feature we want to talk about, and then you start asking engineer, okay, how long will it take to get that, right? And can we get this as part of the whatever framework you're using, typical OKRs or something similar, where so there will basically be some accountability on what's being prioritized this project. Now, there's a lot of conversation typically of, is this a P1 or a P2? And that's a very, if you're not familiar with the P system, you have P0, P1, P2, P4. If it's above P2 or P2 or above, you might not make it in the quarter. So it's a very more big discussion of what you want to prioritize. But that's an exercise for the PM to do together with, of course, the engineering managers and the TLMs, so technical lead managers. So yeah, product managers do not do delivery management in any sort of form of making sure that something is being delivered. That's handled 100% by the engineers.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And I'm going to ask Jason you this question. It's from Leonard in the audience, different Leonard, I'm assuming. Haven't been a product manager myself a while ago. I see if the product manager as the main role that needs to convince stakeholders, every type of stakeholders. Would you relate to this in your organization? Basically, are they a salesperson more than an engineer or more than anything else?
Yeah, well, I think that, my background before going into product was very much more on the engineering side, sort of building the software and then kind of slowly segueing over into product management over the years. And I think that it's natural for me in many ways, probably for anyone. I kind of call it your area of most capability or area of most step capability. Like basically, there's a thing that you're going to be most comfortable with in any like your instincts are going to be in a certain area. So for me, coming from a development background, I'm always going to be 20 years developing software. There's always going to be some level of comfort in dealing with my engineering peeps, because of course there is. Those are my people, right? But at the same time, that's not my job anymore. And again, going back to that kind of idea of being like, I can quite honestly open up and say that I wasn't the best developer, but I don't just want to be seen as a product person because I wasn't a good developer. Like my interests brought me in this direction, and my desire to contribute cross-functionally across all the different parts of that wonderful Venn diagram that we all know and love. So for me, it's like, well, wherever my instincts may kind of lie or draw me to, and there's always probably a drift there. When times are hard, you kind of go back to your area of comfort. But for me, it's like that. I don't know if it's necessarily being a salesperson, but more like an advocate, like a chief advocate for your product, an advocate not just for the engineers, not just for the designers, but also for the business, the commercial, the users, of course, the users. And to try and bring yourself as close as possible to the center of all of those different circles on the Venn diagram, of which I've probably added 2 more circles now, to basically just be there in the middle and basically standing up for everyone. And standing up, obviously, again, for the users, but standing up for how you're going to serve those, how you're going to get the product into people's hands. You're going to have to deal with, in B2B, salespeople. You're going to have to deal with account managers. You're going to have to deal with direct client requests from the person who represents 25% of your revenue. These things are going to happen based on this type of company that you are. And I think that for me, yes, it's 100% a function of the product management or the product management team to be that advocate for the product. Obviously, as far as possible, good product thinking, good product principles to make sure that they're building products in a way that everyone enjoys doing and that they're building the right stuff because they're actually doing the research and doing all of that good discovery stuff. And then, being the advocate for all of those and being able to, I guess, ultimately, yes, from an advocacy perspective, sell to the rest of the organization, including the engineers, working with all of these people to make sure that they bring that product across the line and get it out to as many people and delight as many people as possible. So I do think that I do relate to it. I think B2B, certainly B2E, sort of ascending into enterprise, does have a few wrinkles on top of that maybe make it more like that as well. Because again, you have these big power dynamics between big clients and small startups that you have to start trying to ride that wave as well. But I think that the biggest thing that I want to get product managers away from is being seen as either part of the development team specifically, like actually just an extra person in the development team who doesn't do as much coding, or someone whose job is just to pass messages back and forth to the developers. Like those aren't bad roles in a way, kind of, but they're not product management. And I think that we need to shift the narrative and say that product managers are there to help the company make good decisions about the products that it puts in front of its users, And that involves being equally close to all of the different parts of the business.
Great. Fanny, I'm going to ask you a question that's from another person around the Amazon, of a concept of a single-threaded leader for large initiatives as opposed to product managers. They found having a senior person, not outsourced, helps to keep deliverables on track. Is there a similar role in your organization?
That's actually a great question. So we don't have a similar role per se in the organizations. We have directors in charge of each of the domains, and they come up with they're in charge a bit similar to what Leonard said before. They're in charge then of making sure that the results for that specific part of the company work. But we did have an example recently because we work in healthcare. We were working on the vaccination effort in Germany and in France. And we built a task force, and then for that task force, we had one of our leaders and the product leaders being in charge of that specific task force, and then making this the whole project, because it was also a very intense project and very risky project. We really needed to get done fast, so he was also in charge of making sure the delivery, making sure that everyone was aligned from all the different teams, not only product teams, and that I think was really, really helpful. I don't think it would apply in our case just for any type of project. I think for a very large initiative, as it was mentioned in a question, maybe it makes sense. It definitely works for us. It worked for us for that specific case.
Brilliant. And Leonard, I have to ask, given it's an Amazon question, what's it like at Google?
So what I've seen, at least from my perspective, is that we have what we call executive sponsors of something. So if it's a large initiative, you have executive sponsors, meaning someone at a very somewhat senior level will run this for and start asking questions. And typically what happens is when someone seniors ask questions, things tend to be prioritized. I think that's another way to say it. So it's somewhat of a shortcut. So it's a similar concept, but it's very much on a case by case basis. And if you have initiatives, you want to do that. I think there's a couple of cases I remember where it's been like, Sundar's been saying this is a priority for the company. Now, obviously that flows to everyone, all the different areas. And then their question is, okay, how can we tackle this large problem we want to solve? Like, I think if you look at what we did in AI, I think that's one example of our machine learning, where we really position ourselves in a good way to deliver things like the assistant, which I think is a great product. Something similar.
Oh, really great. And how do you, I'll actually go back to you, Fanny, on this question. How do you limit duplication of effort across teams?
That's a great question. So I think there was for sure some duplicated effort, but we got now so I know it's a bit sensitive these days to mention this, but we have a team of product operations people. And what they do is they come up with processes and templates and basically all the bricks we need to do our job. Nothing's forced, but they give us the options then to align better and then to make sure we don't duplicate all the things. It's not a magic recipe, but I think the area where it helped us the most was really for user research, because we had also a lot of discovery work that we did that wasn't shared as well, and then that we just duplicated, and you had to learn the same things over and over again, and having a better process for this to share the findings also really helped us. And the same for some specific part of the things you want to check before starting work on a project. So basically all the not administrative work, maybe a bit, all this work, we have tools so that we don't have to redo the same things over and over to recreate the same type of documents that are used for these kind of things. So there, I think that for this type of duplication, this really helps. But there are also, I think what helps the most is also speaking, right? You have to have a good culture of sharing best practices. So we have team meetings, like the product team meetings every week, where everyone shares learnings they had, these kind of things. And I think this communication within the product team is very essential, because you can have as many processes as you want. If you don't know what others are doing, you might end up, doing the same things, and learning from each other is very important for these topics.
And if you had to pick a tool or a method of communicating with your team that's the most effective, what would it be?
That's a very good question. I think, so the two things, there needs to be some kind of written documentation tool. So we use Conference because we use Atlassian. I don't know if Conference is the best. I think the search is pretty horrible, but it does the job. If you're well structured, it's easy to find the things, but you need to have one tool of written documentation. And then the other one would be a very basic thing, a video calling tool or a meeting tool, so that you can have those discussions on a regular basis. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, any fancy tool, but really just like speaking. I think speaking inside or online, either way, having those conversations would be my tool of choice.
Yeah, really great. And Jason, how about yourself on limiting duplication of effort across teams?
Well, again, we're a smaller company, so we get to talk a lot more anyway. I mean, we still have to stay aligned. And I think that actually alignment is one of the biggest problems, even with a small company, like just making sure. I have this kind of image in my head of like people start talking to each other and they start to get aligned, and all the lights start to turn into one light. But then as soon as they stop talking, almost literally as soon as they stop talking, it's like the lights start to drift apart again and make different shadows and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, you can't just keep talking to people all the time, because obviously you never get any work done. So there has to be some kind of middle ground. But I do think that there's this, it's the old cliche, like you have to talk to someone, tell someone something 7, 12, 15, 25 times, however many times you have to tell them for them to actually remember it. And even then, they probably don't remember it the way that you think you told it to them, because you missed something out or a comma in the wrong place. So I think that communication is super important. But again, as a small company, we're probably better place to do that than say Google, because I can, if I want to, just round up the entire technology and product leadership and have a call with them, and we probably get 2 pizzas in that call. It's like we're not at that scale yet. I think that for me though, when it comes to tools, for example, I mean, it's again another cliche, but like no amount of tooling is going to fix a broken culture. And I was actually chatting to a guy earlier on a mentoring call around like this idea that a lot of companies try and fix stuff that's wrong in their company by just whacking loads of process on top. Now, this isn't an attack on product operations. I think that in some cases, product operations is a very good idea. But if you just put process on top of something that's not working, thinking it's going to solve all the problems because now you've got a checklist or something like that, so that's not going to do it. You need to kind of go back to basics and start to realize that there are things that maybe it's your lack of ability to focus, or the fact that you're drowning in tech debt, or that you've kind of got 2 teams that don't talk to each other because they hate each other, or because one person wants to work one way and one person wants to work another way. Like, these are all things that needs to be addressed, but no tool is going to do that for you. You've got to actually get back to basics and have, as Fanny said, really good conversations and just try and get people to open up. But with regards to tools, I mean, we use ClickUp. Like, we actually got off of Jira now. That was fantastic. That was like angels singing from heaven when we got off of Jira. Yeah, everyone seems to want to have a boot into Jira these days. So we use ClickUp for the collaboration piece, a bit of Miro. But I think, frankly, as Fanny said, good old-fashioned documents as well. Just one pages or the like, or they're never one page, but however many pages you can get it down to share around, sort of RFC, request for comment type model, where people can come in and pick holes in your plans, or say that sounds stupid, or come up with this other suggestion you didn't think of yet. I think stuff like that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, great. And Leonard, do you have anything to add on duplication of effort?
No. I think it's just, I think the only thing I would add is on the communication side, written word is much stronger, I think, as you have a lot of stakeholders. And I think the request for communication for comment style is something we do all the time. You socialize a document, which of course is what you say you're going to be doing. And that is just make sure everyone has had their chance to say, no, this won't work because of this thing you didn't think of. So that's a way to kind of socialize and have the written comms down. And I think that the second part is also we spend a lot of time engaging as product teams, even if you don't work with them on a day-to-day, just for the learning sake, which Fanny was alluding to earlier, which is just it's just the best way to understand, because someone will have had the challenge you are currently facing now. In a company like ours, there's a chance of someone having experienced that is very high. So you want to make sure that you learn from them. So we do things like summits, like quarterly. There's a lot of all types of communication methods we use to have that, and it's very focused on using video, of course, now in this day and age. But it used to be typically physical sessions as well, so you can build those really tight relationships as well as you sit down and have after drinks after some event, which I think is really, really useful.
It's really great. I'm going to stick with you, Leonard, and ask you, what in Google, what's the product manager tech relationship like? Does one report to the other? Are they peers? Are they friendly? Are they combative?
What's that like? Very friendly. I think that's the first thing I would say. Very friendly, of course, and they're peers. You look at them as peers, and I think we talked about it before, but I think actually was it Sun Microsystem has this fantastic video of you want to become a product marketing manager, which is their word for product manager, and it quotes and says, if it's a challenge, you have to fix it. So if specs are wrong, you have to fix it. It's your problem. You chose product marketing, if they say. So I take that into my work, and if there's an issue, it's my job to fix it. It's not so if let's say there's two, for instance, two combative engineering teams, it's my job to ensure, get them in the room, make sure we align on what we need to do and move forward. If there's some other issue, it's my responsibility when I work on that or with my team. So it's very much how you kind of look at that. So, but to be fair, we talk about the triad all the time. You're just as much peer as the engineering manager or TLM or whoever leads the engineering team, and then of course the UX who leads the visual stuff, but also UXR side. So between those three, it's very important that you are peers. You're kind of three leaders for whatever project, whatever your initiative you're doing. But I must say that I do notice that a lot of things kind of happen to fall back on the product manager to fix, because 9 out of 10 times the problem is typically on the business side of what we need to do, and at least in my experience. So that could be marketing, could be support, whatever, and then it's up to the product manager to fix. So yeah,
I really like that, and by what you're saying as well, it's almost a cultural issue in terms of if people are having two people needing to get into a room, that you need to almost fix. Maybe there's a business alignment or lack of business alignment or something on that end. Fanny, what's it like on your side for that, the tech relationship and the product manager?
So it's very, very similar. So we have two different departments and we always work in pairs. So we have to be very, very close. Luckily, so far, no issues were raised. So it worked really well. But I would maybe add that in the past, I've noticed when it's not so much on the team level or on the individual level issues, but on the high level, if you don't have this alignment, or if this relationship between tech and product as departments, as teams, is not very aligned, this just leads to many problems down the path, I think. So I think it's important on the team level, but also on the company level, those two departments are very much aligned and have good relationships. It can also be useful sometimes to have some friction, because you do need to have those discussions sometimes to pull in one side or the other, and that's also how you make decisions sometimes. But I felt every time I was working with in a company where the two teams were not aligned, it just led to many issues down the path, and I think that's one also key point to note maybe.
Really like that. I'm going to stick with you, Fanny, because Katie here asks a question on what is the most challenging aspect, in your opinion, of being a product manager?
That's a great question. I would say the definition of the job, maybe, because it's very different from one company to the other. And as PM, you would join a company having your own expectations, and then you discover that maybe it's not exactly the same as the company who hired you. And I think we all have this understanding, when you read articles, you go to events like this one, everyone has their own opinion of what the job of a PM is. And also within a company, the job could be different from one team to the other. I would say the most challenging part would be to have this understanding, this alignment of expectations, what you can offer and what the company needs from you, what the team needs from you.
Perfect. And Jason, I know you're nodding your head. I know you've got a point on this. What's your thoughts on the opinion of being a product manager?
Oh God! I mean, I was going to say the most challenging aspect is getting to sleep without all the internals screaming every night. But no, it's I think what Fanny said is really, I mean, it's true. I think that there's a big difference between a lot of the classic literature out there. Your Inspireds of the world. Fantastic books that we should all read and try and live by as much as we can, but just trying to translate that into your own reality. And that can be seen in some cases as a cop-out, in the sense that some people are like, your reality is the thing that needs to, your company is the thing that needs to change, not the book. And, there's probably a bit of both in there, right? Like ultimately books like Inspired and all the other fantastic books out there are written from a certain perspective, probably one that's closer to Google's than others, because, you know, that it's come from a lot of the big tech world. And I don't believe that all of those things apply to all companies and all situations. But at the same time, I do believe that product managers should be advocates for good product management. And I think one of the things I randomly tweeted the other day is, like, you know, if you're going to hire product managers for your company, let them do product management. If you don't want to let them do product management, then consider potentially not hiring product managers, and, you know, go and get someone else to do whatever it is you do want them to do. You know, maybe you do want a project manager or a delivery manager or a bunch of business analysts to just write up your desires into a form that engineers can read. Like, these are all completely valid roles, and there's nothing wrong with doing any of them. But if you want to do product management, if you want to build a product and get product managers to help you build that and define it and work out the best way to satisfy everyone and build the business, then get people in and allow them to do that. And I think for me, then that's the challenge. And I see it a lot with the mentoring as well. Like, there are a bunch of people out there that are product managers. They want to do good product management stuff. They're flexible as to how they do that, but they have aspirations, but they're being blocked at every turn by companies that hire them and have no idea what to do with them. I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, no, it is. And there's a question here from Lucas. Leonard, I'm going to take this to you. Assuming everyone has their specific responsibilities on building the product, how do you, as a product manager, create a sense of shared accountability of what you're building together? I guess at Google, it's quite difficult, feeling like a cog in a wheel almost. Do you, or how do you create accountability?
Yeah, no, it's accountability comes with responsibility. I think as a PM, you always feel, as long as you feel empowered, and again, I'm not talking about Marty Kagan empowered, but as you personally feel that you have the mandate to do something, the accountability comes with that, right? Because you know you are the one who can change this. It's in your hands to say, hey, no, I need more resources to do X, Y, and Z, and of course come up with a plan for that. So I do think it's very much the accountability is not. I don't see it as a big issue. I think it's much more of. And even when things go bad, I mean, you know, retrospectives or post-mortem processes, we have that, and those are really good in terms of making sure you can, you know, articulate what went wrong in a blameless manner and saying, hey, yeah, sure, you know, we did this was wrong, but of course, this was the wrong thing that happened, and we want to change that outcome, so how can we change that and improve the process? So I would say, you know, accountability to me is less of an issue. I would say, I think as more people build together, it has to be very much, you know, it comes back to the alignment, right? If there's an issue in terms of being, of people are building in, you know, wildly different directions, there's something wrong, you know, in terms of either the documents that haven't been shared, or they haven't been given the right input, and, you know, sometimes you discover those, you know, some way into a process, and then you just have to course correct. And, you know, being flexible, I think Jason to touch up on it. Being flexible as a PM is what's the most important thing you do. I think it's also the most challenging. To answer the other question as well, the most challenging thing is that you have to be so flexible. So I think most PMs that I meet, they are, and especially when we interview, you can really notice who are the flexible thinkers and who are not. And if you're flexible thinkers, you know, you're good in my book, because everything else I can teach you. And that's why, you know, I built the EPIC framework, which is kind of really covers some of the elements of the behaviors of what an individual should have as a product manager. But being flexible is one of them, and I wish I want to add that into my framework. But it's very important to be able to stretch yourself. But at the same time, it's really tiring. And that's why sometimes you're this screaming inside. Some meetings, you kind of go out and you go have a walk and you scream, and then you go back in and you continue your day.
Great. And you can do 2.0 of the EPIC framework the next time, Leonard.
Yes, I will.
We're almost out of time, but I want to touch on this question from each of you, and then a very quick closing point, if that's all right. How do each of you upskill junior PMs, product managers, to take on a team? And Jason, quickly, I might start with you.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, touching on Leonard's point around kind of, you can train a lot of stuff into people. It's a lot more difficult to train attitude or mindset and stuff like that. So that's something that more or less, you know, you'd probably want to hire for. You know, with the caveat, of course, that you don't, you know, that you definitely want to be diverse and inclusive in your hiring. You don't want to like overcompensate for that, but you definitely want to get people that have kind of that hunger and that adaptability kind of, because that's very difficult to train, and that takes like years potentially to train that in. I think apart from that, there's a kind of, I mean, you have to identify people's learning styles, right? So some people like books, some people like courses, some people are School of Hard Knocks like me, some people like to go through kind of certifications. Nothing wrong with any of those. Personally, I think that there's probably 2 or 3 books that I'd say that all PMs should basically read. Whether or not they get to live them, they should read them and internalize those, maybe even read a couple of times if they can. Potentially, I mean, one thing actually that I did with an old team was get an external trainer in. I got Jana from PodPad in to do some, like, a day's training, because even though I'd say much the same things as she would in principle, because we kind of believe in many of the same things, she's an external expert. Kind of bringing in that kind of external person to kind of be completely abstracted from your day-to-day and come and say some of this stuff in an unbiased fashion, I think could be really powerful to kind of try and inspire people towards moving towards something and build some of those skills up as they go.
Great. And Fanny, how about you? How do you upskill junior product managers?
So I completely agree with Jason. When I was working as a smaller companies, that's also the type of things we did. Now that I work at Upskill, we have an APM program, so that we take people from other departments who want to become product managers, which I found is awesome because they're also great. They have their great experience, and they get a boot camp for 1 to 2 weeks where they get lots of different sessions, and then after that they are mentored by one senior PM who then let them make mistake also, and learn, and coaches them. But I think it is similar to what Jason explained. Basically, just we do this internally, but otherwise, I think reading and getting, going to this kind of events, this kind of things also helps to shape what you believe is the right way to do product.
Great. And last but not least, Leonard.
It's, you upskill junior PMs by, we force you have the formal program. So we have an APM program, of course, as well. And you can do transfers internally at Google. There's another way to do it. But I think the real learning comes in having someone to coach you who has done this before and can kind of tell you, yeah, okay, so what are you thinking? And just, you could really kind of coach it. And this would be, it could be marketing, could be sales, could be the same thing. I would argue it's the same challenge, but from a product perspective, it's such a unique role that having someone who's done it before is very useful. So I tap into a lot of the more senior leaders we have, VPs who've been in the company for a long, long time, and can explain to me why things are like they are in sometimes. Because sometimes you're like, you bang your head against something and you're like, well, it's been like that. So I think, and I try to do the same with my team and the stakeholding teams that I work with, is to be that coach and try to figure out, okay, no, I actually read about this somewhere. Let me connect you with that individual. Let me connect you to that document or something similar like that. So being as helpful as you can. So that's kind of the core thing. I think the other part I would say is also let them make the mistakes. So even if I've been to many sessions where I've been coaching someone and they have an opinion or they have a thought, an idea which I don't think will work, but at the same time I know they're brilliant and I trust them. So let's see how this plays out. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and then you have to kind of course correct before they really wreck into the wall. But you let them get as close to the wall as they can, because then they learn and they'll try to adapt hopefully the next time.
Yeah, just one bookend on that. Actually, I think that point about kind of coaching and mentorship, but specifically mentorship. I think mentorship is one of the highest leverage activities that you can have as a junior through to leadership position. Like, it's easy to think that people might need less of it as they progress through their careers, but I don't think that's true at all. Like, there's always something that's new to you that you don't know is it's okay. And I think that having people around you, peer mentorship or even mentorship within your company or whatever, I think can be super high leverage, because it can help you understand what's okay, what's not, what's a problem, what's not, and help you to build a lot of confidence as well.
That's great. We are over time, unfortunately. That was fantastic. I think this is a really important topic, and I'm delighted that all of you have got involved. So thank you all again. I really, really appreciate it. And we'll do a post summary after this with all of your details. And if you ever have anything to add, we'd love to have your thoughts again. So thank you all for a great session.